Hello, here we are on the fifth Sunday of Lent, and Passion Tide begins as we get towards Holy Week. And this week's reading is a long reading, so I'm not going to read it all, but I do challenge you almost to read it and ponder on it for quite a long time. It's John chapter 11 and the first 45 verses. John 11, the first 45 verses. A familiar reading, one that I think we all know about, but it's worth reading in detail again. And it's all about Jesus raising Lazarus from the dead. Jesus is away at the time and he gets a frantic message from Martha and Mary, Lazarus's sisters, that Lazarus is very ill and dying. But Jesus doesn't go back immediately. He waits for 3 days. By the time he gets there, Lazarus is already dead and in the tomb. And we're told that he'd been in the tomb for several days. Nevertheless, Jesus still raises him literally from the dead. And it's a tough reading, challenges the faith of Martha and Mary, also challenges our faith. And of course, thinking about our faith is what we are challenged to do over this season of Lent. Lent, as we know, is all about new life and renewal, and we're given a practical impression of this by a seemingly impossible act when Jesus literally brings Lazarus back to life. And the word Lent means new life, and in our rural parishes here, we are surrounded by new life at this time of the year. The fields are turning green and the grass fields are getting full of sheep and lambs. And although, as I said, it's a long reading, this reading about raising Lazarus, and it takes a lot of unpicking. There's an awful lot in it. We need to read it several times and ponder on it, as those of us who have been attending the Lent course on Lectio Divina have been encouraged to do, and to pray over our Bible readings as well. And Martha had to listen really hard when Jesus said to her words of comfort, "Your brother will rise again." But she listened to a different question, I think, and she said, "I know that he will rise again at the resurrection on the last day, but what help is that to me now?" Jesus answered her with the seventh of his famous sayings in John, "I am, I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, will live, and everyone who believes in me will never die." And we often use that sentence at funerals, and it is the great truth of Easter that we are looking forward to. Sentence is the basis of all of our Christian faith. And this story of raising Lazarus is only told by John of all the gospel writers. The other gospel writers tell us of different events of healing and bringing people back to life, but just after they've died. But we're told Lazarus had been dead for 4 days, and we're told that his body had even started to decay. So an awful lot to ponder and think about in this reading from John. Jesus is told of Lazarus's illness through a letter or a message. He could have healed him immediately from a distance, but either he needed time to pray, or possibly some people believe he delayed his departure from Bethany so that the miracle would seem greater when he raised him from the dead. So when he does arrive at the home of the morning, he's greeted by the sisters, and Mary says to him, "Lord, if you were here, my brother would not have died." Probably what she really meant was, "Lord, why didn't you come when I prayed so hard for you to come and heal him?" And how often and how easy it is for us to say that when God doesn't answer our prayers for what we ask for. Jesus had arrived at a Jewish house of mourning, where formal rituals and customs had to be carried out. Bodies in those days had to be buried as quickly as possible because of the weather, and as many as possible attended a hasty arranged funeral. One of the more unusual customs then was that women led the mourning. And at the tomb, memorial speeches were made, and then they left the tomb. Most people would stand in two lines so the chief mourners could walk between them. A sensible arrangement, if you think about it, because it meant the mourners could go and grieve in peace. There were also set customs in the house after somebody had died. As long as the body was in the house, eating, drinking wine was forbidden. And as soon as the body left, all of the furniture was taken out and the mourner sat on low stools or on the floor. And this deep mourning lasted for 7 days. And the first 3 days were days of weeping and not talking. And during those 7 days of mourning, it was forbidden to put on any shoes, do any business or any studying, or even to wash. So this would have been the scene that Jesus arrived at when he came to raise Lazarus. So we can understand why Jesus became upset. And this makes a miracle of raising Lazarus even more spectacular. And I want to focus for a minute or two on the shortest verse in the Bible, verse 35 of that reading. Jesus wept. Just 2 words, Jesus wept. Lazarus, Martha, and Mary were very close to Jesus. They really were a bit of a surrogate family to him. They often offered him respite, they gave him rest, and they looked after him and they cared for him in their own home. So it wouldn't be unusual for Jesus to weep. So maybe in that Lectio Divina style, we could focus on those 2 words, Jesus wept. Having said those 2 words, it's packed with complexity. Jesus wept after speaking with Lazarus's grieving sisters and seeing all the mourners. That seems natural enough. Most of us would have wept as well, except that Jesus had come from Bethany to raise Lazarus from the dead. So you might think it was easy that Jesus would be a confident, joyful, calm in the in the story and the storm of their sorrow. So why did Jesus weep? Maybe it was just simply deep compassion. Compassion that Jesus feels for all who are suffering. It's true that by not healing Lazarus from a distance or by delaying his coming, he had let Lazarus die. Maybe it was because Jesus knew that the cross was just days away, and he knew what his suffering would have to come, and he was weeping for himself. Maybe a possible reason for Jesus weeping was that he knew that in raising Lazarus, he could actually cause the religious leaders to finally take action against him, and with that bring his death and, of course, his resurrection. So whatever the reason for those 2 very profound words, Jesus wept, it's a further proof to us as Christians of Jesus' humanity and his love for us. And maybe Lent is a good opportunity for each one of us to quietly focus and pray for the things going on in our world today that might cause Jesus to weep now. And what each one of us might be able to do to focus on what we can do to alter what's going on. So I do commend this long reading to you, John 11, the first 45 verses, and to commend you to read and study them and to remember those 2 words, Those two very profound words in verse 35, Jesus wept. And as we come towards Lent, it is a time, as we come towards Easter rather, it's a time of joy, but we have to go through Jesus's death and our own weeping as we come to that time of joy. Amen.